the mid-1990s, I was leading a design firm in Salt Lake City of about 25 architects, and I was contacted by an old friend who had asked me at the time if I would be willing to meet his employer, Dan Cook, who is an architect and a contractor, and would be willing to have him come down and meet me so that he could give me all of his clients that he was working with. I gratefully accepted that invitation for him to come down. A few days later, Dan came in. I was puzzled by what he was doing, but he explained at the time that he wanted to try to go on a national basis to see ministry-driven projects succeed at a much higher rate. Dan came into the office. He was asking me questions about my background. He did deposit some of those clients with me. I met them and started working with them on a project-by-project basis. I lost track of Dan over the next few years, but in 1998 read a newspaper article about a church that Dan had helped through some very difficult financial struggles. Had come in, changed the design from the original architect to bring things back into budget, actually added some square footage, gave them a very high-quality building, but did it for a far less amount than the original architect had proposed. That was the first time I had heard the name Building God's Way. I didn't quite understand the name. It didn't make sense to me. Several years after that, I met Dan at a conference that I had organized for the State American Institute of Architects. I was the incoming president that year. And Dan had come to the conference to try to meet me and asked me to come to Ogden to see what it was that he was doing. I was involved in community-based projects on a statewide basis. I had sufficient amount of work, felt a little bit pressured to go up to Ogden to see what he was doing, but nevertheless carved some time out of my schedule to go up at least and have lunch with Dan and hear more about Building God's Way. I ended up going up to Ogden, and I spent about 6 hours with him, and during that time frame saw a very different methodology about how to put projects together, much more relationally based, much less portfolio-based, where the architect becomes the center of attention or the contractor becomes the focal point for the project. And instead, I was seeing a different type of project base where the architect, the contractor, and the owner were really teaming together in a way that really lent, I think, all of their best efforts to seeing a project built that would become a tool for a ministry-based approach. And I was very intrigued by that because I was used to battleground architecture. Dan asked me at the time if I was ready to join him. I told him I wasn't ready to do that. I did not come up there with the express intent of joining him, but I ended up going up to Ogden nevertheless to begin a process of learning more. I was learning a different way to do it. I was used to more of a portfolio mentality where the architect goes into a project very selfishly to guard his portfolio and working with contractors who are very selfishly trying to gain profit on projects, and considered it my duty to sort of go to war. Dan was saying exactly the opposite, that we would go and forge relationships with people and that we would do things in a very different way, one that was God-honoring and consistent with who we are as Christians, learning how to sort of set aside the goals of perhaps a portfolio-based architect and elevate the goals of a client who is trying to bring on a ministry tool, and working with a contractor who's also willing to set aside perhaps pure profit goals on a project to again elevate the goals of stewardship and ministry. And over the course of the next month or so, and then the subsequent year, I became engaged at a higher level on all of these different kinds of projects, seeing projects get built for far less cost than I had previously been exposed to. And ironically, all of this happened at a year that my firm won Firm of the Year award, and then several weeks after we won the award, we actually closed the firm, and I became Dan Cook's partner and joined him in the effort to try to get these ministry-based projects built. When I joined Building God's Way, I received an opportunity to really change the whole nature of my practice when I became Dan's partner, and spent a much greater percentage of my time working both on the collegiate level or the community level with churches in their various worship areas and so forth. I've literally worked in the last 11 years on several hundred projects that have to do with either a church focus or a theater focus. Over the course of my career, I've been blessed with a number of awards both in the church and the theater realm. I've received numerous trade association awards, several awards for the Rose Wagner Center, received a merit award from the American Institute of Architects. The City of Salt Lake gave us an award for the best arts project in a 25-year span. I've also received awards for several other performing arts centers around the state. Recently, we've won some awards for some of our church projects for the Northlands Church in Orlando, Florida, for the St. Andrew's Lutheran Project in Silver Spring, Maryland. Those projects both received awards for some of the best projects on a national basis. So it's been very gratifying to receive those, though that has not been the focal point of our practice here at Building God's Way.